Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus.
He was a terroristic ruler.
History remembers him by the nickname he hated, Caligula, or Little Boots.
There are several unusual rumours about Caligula's conduct as emperor. He seems to have enjoyed watching the execution of his victims, having them executed in the most torturous way possible.
There's a casual cruelty to everything that he does.
We know Caligula is reported to say, "Let them hate me so long as they fear me."
He ruled the world's greatest empire. But behind the crown was a mind unraveling and a reign soaked in blood.
Even Tiberius, the archetypal debauched emperor, is shocked at how willingly he participates in the most shocking forms of torture and sexual immorality.
Using groundbreaking AI imagery to show his world as never before, we examine the myths that launched the mystery. Will new evidence help reevaluate Caligula's brutal reputation?
The fact that he can't distinguish between the inappropriateness of what he's doing tells me we've got a psychopath on our hands.
Rulers come and go, but what legacy will the sands of time leave behind? Caligula, was he truly a killer king? Caligula, reputedly Rome's most tyrannical and erratic emperor. But before he was emperor, before he was feared, he was adored.
He comes from the royal family. His father was Germanicus, who was for a time the leading general in Rome under the Emperor Tiberius. And his mother was Agrippina. Agrippina was the granddaughter of the first Roman Emperor, Augustus.
His father, Germanicus, was a great hero of the Roman Empire, to the extent that he is mentioned in the same breath as Alexander the Great. He's almost superhuman in his heroics. And it's clear that Caligula's relationship with Germanicus led to him being very popular with the people.
Rome is at war. Germanicus is leading campaigns in Germania to avenge the devastating loss of 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. With him is his youngest son, just a child, but already a presence in the camp.
The son was adored by the troops.
He was taken under the wing of his father's soldier and kind of adopted the young Caligula as a mascot for the legions. They used to dress the son of their general up in kind of a miniature soldier's uniform. The Roman soldiers wore boots called caliga, which were hobnail boots issued to all soldiers, and the diminutive form of caliga is caligula, meaning little boots.
He always endeared himself to the soldiers to get this pet name. But spending time with his father at such a young age, directly on the front line, right there in the heat of the battle, learning about all the strategies, seeing all the horrific physical injuries, the sorts of things that people wouldn't be exposed to, let alone as a tiny child.
Gaius marched with one of Rome's greatest generals across a volatile frontier. His presence wasn't purely ceremonial. He was used as a talisman to steady the ranks of restless soldiers on the brink of mutiny.
When Germanicus felt that the troops were going to turn upon him and might kill him and his family, he dispatched the women of the camp and Caligula to the local Gallic city. The troops saw that matters had reached a level of severity that civil war was going to break out in the camp. There was also an emotional attachment to Caligula, possibly to his mother. And at that point, the mutiny came to an end.
This will have shaped Caligula absolutely fundamentally. It will have desensitized him to extreme violence, of course. I think it will have sown the seeds for the development of a really hyper-masculine personality. He bonded in this context of violence, of being a man, of being involved in war.
Germanicus is recalled to Rome a hero. But the glory was short-lived.
At the end of that campaign, he was brought back to Rome, and then he was almost immediately sent off to Syria.
Officially sent to assert Roman authority over the empire's client kingdoms, many believed it was a political move by the Emperor Tiberius. A wildly popular general, Germanicus was sent far from Rome into a region known for its volatile politics.
And the reason for this is supposedly because of Tiberius's jealousy.
He was given sweeping powers in the east, but very quickly he fell out with the governor of Syria, a man named Gnaeus Piso.
While in the province that Piso was the governor of, Germanicus falls very ill. And he is convinced that he's ill because Piso is poisoning him.
All sorts of accusations then flew that Piso was using witchcraft, that he was trying to poison Germanicus.
Germanicus's health continues to deteriorate, and then, aged just 33, he dies in agony.
Germanicus died under circumstances which were regarded as suspicious.
The empire mourned. But for Caligula, then only 7 years of age, the loss was shattering. Dr. Donna Youngs is an investigative psychologist who's been looking at the life of Caligula.
Having bonded so profoundly to his father, to then lose his father, both at such a young age and in circumstances that he probably didn't understand, will have set the stage for Caligula to become very suspicious, very paranoid, very fearful.
The adored son of Rome's brightest star became a child shadowed by grief, betrayal, and silence.
Caligula's mother makes a big show of returning to Rome with his ashes, and she is rapturously received by the populace of Rome because Germanicus was so popular. And she arrives very kind of dramatically clutching her husband's ashes and her infant son, Caligula.
But this triumphal return goes down badly with the increasingly paranoid Tiberius.
Tiberius had Agrippina arrested and sent into exile. The two older sons were also arrested and exiled, and eventually Tiberius had all three of them killed. Agrippina probably by being starved to death.
Caligula is the only survivor of the purge of his family, and only then because Tiberius needs a successor with royal blood running through his veins.
We see Caligula, when he turns 19, joining Tiberius, the emperor, on Capri. And this is where Caligula is kind of brought under Tiberius's wing.
Tiberius, Rome's second emperor, had once ruled with discipline and caution. But by the time Caligula joined him on the island of Capri, the aging ruler had withdrawn from Rome and from restraint.
Capri was a pleasure palace. Tiberian culture was luxurious and, to a large extent, immoral. There are astonishing stories of Tiberius bringing young men and women to the palace and sexually exploiting them.
Tiberius uses his retreat on Capri to indulge all of his worst vices, and he lives a life of excess, of gluttony and sexual immorality.
The island became Gaius's classroom. But what was Tiberius teaching his young apprentice?
Caligula was incredibly vulnerable. He was a blank page ready for Tiberius and all his exploits to be written on. He was absolutely defenseless psychologically, emotionally, to what he would be exposed to.
To survive, Caligula must adapt. He learned how power truly worked, how fear could rule men more effectively than law.
He had learnt that to be a man's man, to fit in, to get Tiberius's love and support in the same way that he got his father's, one thing was crucial, and that was his participation in the activities.
Even the debauched Emperor Tiberius is shocked at the extreme nature of Caligula's personality. He's almost a little bit scared by the savagery that Caligula displays.
Caligula did more than fit in. He played the game, cementing his position as the heir presumptive to Tiberius's throne.
Tiberius complained that people were turning to Gaius as the rising sun and worshipping him, whereas the setting sun, Tiberius himself, was slipping away from their attention.
The empire is still in its infancy in this period. Tiberius is only the second Roman emperor, and so there is no kind of constitutional basis for the transfer of power.
And when Tiberius dies suddenly, Caligula is perfectly positioned to take power. Some say too perfectly.
Tiberius dies in 37 AD, and the events surrounding his death are kind of shrouded in mystery.
There are always rumors around deaths of emperors.
Our sources do not agree on the specific circumstances. In one version of events, Tiberius is starved to death by Caligula. In another, he is poisoned by Caligula. And in a third, he is smothered and suffocated to death with a pillow.
He survived war, purges, and the twisted mentorship of a dying tyrant. Now Rome waited for him, and no one, not even Tiberius, could predict what Caligula would become. Tiberius is dead. The empire turns to 24-year-old Caligula, the great-grandson of Augustus Caesar and the son of one of Rome's greatest generals. And for a moment, Rome rejoices.
So the first months of Caligula's reign are received very well by the Roman populace. Tiberius was a hated emperor. By the end of his reign, there had been what the historian describes as a reign of terror. He was so hated that the people gathered in the streets and chanted "To the Tiber with Tiberius," demanding that his body be thrown into the river Tiber. And so the people of Rome and the Senate see Caligula's rise to power as freeing them from the tyranny of Tiberius.
Tiberius's death was celebrated, and the accession of Gaius was welcomed as a new golden age. He was seen as a new man, a man who would change the oppressive and violent age of Tiberius and bring a new and golden age to Rome.
In his first weeks, he pardons prisoners. He gives out bonuses to the army. He buries Tiberius with respect and promises the Senate a new era of peaceful collaboration.
We're seeing all the honor and leadership capabilities of his father, the great Roman general, coming out through Caligula. We're seeing Little Boots coming into his manhood as emperor.
One of his first acts is to end the practice of maestas, which is the practice of treason trials that were very prominent under Tiberius. He makes a big public display of not only taking the law of maestas off the books, but publicly burning all of the court records of people previously convicted of maestas and people who were currently under suspicion.
What he seems to have been very anxious to do in this early stage was to represent himself as a fresh start, a new model emperor for Rome, and to bring together the various factions in Roman society, and especially amongst the Roman aristocracy.
This is a new time where the people are going to be free and prosperous and not living under the reign of terror of Tiberius.
For 6 months, Rome lives in a dream. But the dream is about to shatter.
The key turning point, according to our sources, is Caligula becomes ill 6 months into 37 AD.
We don't know what it is, we don't know how serious it was, but there was at least some thought that he would die.
And this illness seems to have changed his personality significantly. He starts to exhibit certain behaviours that signal to the Senate and to the people that all is not well, and that Caligula perhaps isn't the saviour from the tyranny of Tiberius that they had initially hoped for.
Caligula suffers some kind of severe seizure, some kind of rare form of epilepsy. We hear reports of bizarre behaviour, him laughing without motivation. We hear reports of severe insomnia, of all sorts of emotional incontinence, contrasting so sharply with the regimented, disciplined, powerful, potent, virile Caligula up to this point.
The city is frozen with concern. Their golden boy, hailed as a new beginning, is slipping away.
Caligula's illness seems to have caused massive concern among the populace of Rome. In fact, several prominent Romans vowed their lives to the gods as human sacrifices if Caligula could recover. There is a massive outpouring of grief among the populace of Rome who see Caligula as their saviour after the tyrannies of Tiberius.
Caligula makes a recovery, but Rome soon realizes the man who emerged is not the one they had crowned. Ancient sources tell us he became erratic, paranoid, cruel.
Several historians have debated the nature of the illness that afflicted Caligula, whether it was physical in nature or whether it was more mental. However, what is clear from the sources is that things change after his illness.
So we see emerging a very different person from the young, bold and strong, charismatic leader before this. Instead, we see somebody who seems to have, rather than a disciplined, organized military mind, we see somebody who seems to have very little control of his emotions.
The man who once promised peace now ruled with violence. Rome had placed its hopes in Caligula, but public affection quickly turned to fear. And even those closest to him were not safe, as one of his most loyal supporters was about to find out.
Macro had been one of Caligula's earliest supporters. He had been instrumental in bringing the army over to Caligula's side to support his claim to the throne, and yet, by early 38, it's clear that Macro has fallen from favour.
Macro, the powerful Praetorian prefect, had been instrumental in securing Caligula's rise. But shortly after his illness, the emperor begins to see his old friend as a threat. Too influential, too close to the throne.
The events surrounding Macro's death are not clear at all from our sources. He is potentially implicated in some kind of conspiracy against the emperor. Again, whether this is based in fact or whether this is Caligula's paranoia is up for debate. However, by 38 AD, he has been forced to take his own life.
Macro was ordered to commit suicide. It was a rather brutal realignment of the politics of the moment.
Caligula shows himself willing to eliminate even his closest allies. After Macro, no one around Caligula was safe.
The fall of Macro was a really significant change in political activity. It comes at the same time as a realignment of the imperial family.
Next to get caught in the young emperor's crosshairs, his cousin Gemellus, the grandson of former Emperor Tiberius, whom Caligula has sworn to protect.
Gemellus' death comes about in late 37. Caligula, having recovered from his illness, is convinced that Gemellus is plotting against him. Whether Gemellus was involved in a conspiracy against Caligula or whether this is Caligula's paranoia is lost to history. During Caligula's illness, Gemellus had also stepped up into a more public role to take the place of his cousin, and had perhaps been received quite well by the populace, and this had perhaps signalled to Caligula that there was someone else waiting in the wings who could potentially challenge him for power.
He perceived him as being a threat as he grew older. And Gaius used that as an excuse, and he sent his soldiers to kill him.
In quite a poignant scene, Gemellus is handed a sword with which to take his own life. Because Gemellus is very young and naive, he doesn't really know how to actually do the act itself, and he has to be helped to take his own life because he's never held a sword before.
The early optimism of Caligula's reign shifted to a darker, more paranoid time. Rome becomes a political minefield. In public, he'd once burned the records of treason trials against members of the Senate. But now, the old laws returned.
By 39 AD, relations with the Senate have soured, and he's addressing the Senate to rebuke them for their criticism of Tiberius. He feels that their open criticism of the previous emperor should not be permitted, and that they should actually bear in mind that many of Tiberius's treason trials that he had been holding were perfectly legitimate. And it's at this point that Caligula reveals that the records of the treason trials, which he had burned publicly in a great show of departure from the reign of Tiberius early in his reign, he actually had kept copies. He tells the Senate that he is reintroducing the law of majestas, the law of treason, and from now on, the Senate will be living in fear.
The trials were more than legal proceedings. They were tools for eliminating rivals, seizing wealth, and asserting absolute control. Charges could be based on rumors or even symbolic dreams and gestures.
We see Caligula with no hesitation murdering political rivals. For Caligula, his way of doing politics is reflecting those early days of training on the front line. Going about politics as if war, no hesitation, not just to remove political rivals, but to have them murdered.
And it's not enough for Caligula to lay waste to his enemies. He wishes to be anointed as a living god while he does it.
One of the biggest controversies of Caligula's reign seems to have been his desire to be worshipped as a god. Roman emperors could be deified after their death. It was, however, a big no-no for an emperor to be worshipped as a god during his lifetime. The controversy in Caligula's reign is that he seems to have explicitly desired to be worshipped as Jupiter, and to have set up temples to him in Rome during his lifetime. This is a significant violation of Roman religious norms.
This is all, for the Romans, difficult behavior.
Caligula, the man who promised peace, now insists that he wasn't just favored by the gods, but was a living god himself.
So progressively, Caligula associates himself with the divine.
He had temples and altars built in his honor with priests dedicated to his cult, and demanded sacrifices to Divus Caligula, divine Caligula.
It's one thing to erect a statue of yourself to be celebrated, but to have it's not even audacity, it's the lack of judgment, the insanity to insist that you be worshipped as a god by your people. It's a clear indication of somebody who is insane.
Roman relationship with deities was to be much closer than we understand today. But this was a step further than even the hated Tiberius had dared to take.
Dressing up as the divine seems to have been something that members of the Roman aristocracy did from time to time. What was different was that he seems to have demanded a level of worship of himself while he was a living being. In later traditions, this is seen as evidence of an unstable mind. At the time, it was certainly extreme, but doesn't seem in itself to have been regarded as madness. Nevertheless, living with a god was probably hard.
When a man is worshipped as a god, who is left to hold him accountable? With no limits left, Caligula's cruelty became something more than policy. It became power, performance.
He throws his uncle into the river for some imagined slight. He makes a senator beg for his life because he'd put up a statue to Gaius, which was interpreted as being not quite praising him enough.
Caligula liked to put people to death via many, many small wounds that would cause the most pain over the longest period of time before they actually succumbed to death. He seems to have enjoyed watching the execution of his victims, and not only executing his victims, but having them executed in the most torturous way possible.
Mixed with the brutality, there were power games.
He helps a dinner party, and at the dinner party, he starts to laugh, and everybody wonders what he is laughing at. The most powerful person in the room starts to laugh. Do you laugh along? And he tells them, it's just occurred to me that I can have any of you killed. Now that's fun, obviously. For Gaius, it is not fun for everyone else.
He forces a man to watch the execution of his family, and then forces that man to attend a dinner party with the emperor, at which the emperor is very jovial and tries to engage his victim in light-hearted conversation and make him kind of laugh and joke about the brutal murder of his family.
And he dined, and he ate, and he played along. And when he was asked why he did so, he said, I have another son.
And these games were not just for private pleasure. Caligula was keen to extend his bloodlust for public pleasure.
One thing that Caligula is accused of is feeding criminals to the wild beasts that are kept for beast hunts in the arena. Upon being told that feeding cattle to these wild beasts is quite expensive and these animals are needed for displays in the arena, Caligula points out that it would be much cheaper to feed criminals to them. This is not a punishment, this is a steady diet for the animals to replace the costly expense of buying cattle to feed to them.
Now, one of the things that marks out somebody whose brain has become psychopathic is the complete inability to what we call emotionally calibrate, to distinguish, to differentiate between what's an appropriate behavior and what's a non-appropriate behavior. The inappropriateness of what he's doing in turning criminals into the food of wild beasts tells me we've got a psychopath on our hands.
But how much of this is true? There is a hysteria to the stories which begin to sound like just good stories.
Caligula is one of the better attested of the Roman emperors. We have a whole range of sources about him, some of which are contemporary or near-contemporary. The most influential accounts on Caligula come from the historian Cassius Dio, who was writing in the 3rd century, so more or less 200 years after Caligula's death, and Suetonius, the biographer, who was writing about 8 years after his death.
Suetonius essentially lists a long list of various shocking deeds that Caligula did. He starts his biography narrating Caligula's early life, and when he gets to the point after his illness when Caligula seems to have made a turn for the worse, Suetonius says he's finished narrating the history of Caligula the emperor, now he is turning to tell the story of Caligula the monster.
The near-contemporary histories written of Caligula are sensationalist, salacious, morally outraged.
Roman emperors attracted gossip, and this was in an age before you had libel laws or you had any journalistic integrity. Stories circulated, and stories circulated whether they were true or not. They might have been believed by some. The stories might have been just too good to miss out of the historical accounts.
Suetonius tells us that Caligula condemned a man to death, had him thrown to wild beasts in the arena, and as the man was screaming for his life, Caligula has him brought forth out of the arena. The man thinks he's been rescued by the emperor, at which point Caligula complains about his screaming, has his tongue cut out, and has him thrown back to the wild beasts.
Women would come along to dinner parties. He would decide which one was the prettiest or which of the husbands he would wish to offend, and then he'd carry them off into a side room before returning and discussing the sexual prowess. The basic level of humiliation of members of the Roman aristocracy.
One of the other most famous stories about Caligula is the story that he supposedly made his horse a consul.
And again, that's a story that has been treated to an extreme interpretation.
Caligula was very fond of his horse Incitatus, and this horse lived a life of luxury. Its stable was made from marble, it ate from an ivory manger, it had its own house. This, according to Suetonius, culminates in Caligula deciding that this horse is going to be made a consul of Rome.
Maybe that's true, maybe that's not.
But perhaps the most notorious story about Caligula is the claim that he had an incestuous relationship with his sisters, and one in particular, Drusilla.
His sisters are a really interesting case. He puts them front and center. He presents them as if they were graces or muses or certainly divinities. This gives rise to various accusations that he has had sexual relations with all three of his sisters, that he pimps out his sisters.
I think we have to view these rumours with a great deal of scepticism. This probably stems from the fact that early in his reign, he changes the oath of allegiance that is sworn to the emperor to also include Caligula's sisters. This seems to have been an unprecedented honour for members of the imperial family, and this is perhaps the root of some of the stories of incest that are preserved by writers like Suetonius and Cassius Dio.
But it does seem clear that he doesn't mind those stories circulating. Those stories seem to increase his status as being someone who is able to break all social conventions, including deeply held moral conventions. The only other people who can do that are the gods.
Caligula's belief in his own divinity fueled an unwavering self-confidence that no one could touch him, a confidence enforced by his ever-present and utterly ruthless Praetorian Guard.
There's a part of him, I think, that thinks he is invincible.
Whatever he did, he was immune. The Guard were there. The Guard would protect him. He could make fun of people, but there would always be those who would stand at his side. He didn't think that they would even dare to take him on. He didn't think that they would kill him.
Caligula is confident, untouchable, worshipped. In just 4 years, he's reduced the Senate to spectators in their own government. He's mocked them, ignored protocol, and forced them to treat him as a god. His private god, the Praetorian Guard, is insulted, bypassed, and cruelly punished. Rome is simmering with anger and humiliation.
The very randomness of this violence made everybody afraid. The fact that he was also erratic in his personal behavior, that he was sexually rapacious, that he seized women and subjected them to sexual violence and rape, that he pretended to be associated with the gods, He used random violence as an act of terror against the Roman aristocracy. They were terrified.
A plan is hatched to bring Caligula down. But the stakes were incredibly high. Failure meant torture, execution, and the destruction of your entire family.
Moving against the Roman emperor was an extremely dangerous activity. If they found out, you'd get killed. If your attempted assassination was unsuccessful, you'd get killed. If your attempted assassination was successful, but you didn't have the kind of political support, you'd get killed.
The risk was massive, but so was the fear of what might happen if no one stopped him. And so the planning begins. Slowly. In secret.
It's not clear exactly how many people were involved and how many of them were senators.
They took 6 months to try and find the right opportunity to kill him.
January 24th. A corridor beneath the imperial palace is the place they identify for the hit.
What happens is that during a celebration games in the imperial palace,
They found a moment when he would leave the theatre, he would progress down a corridor, and there they would meet him.
Masterminding the assassination attempt, the Praetorian Guard, the elite team of soldiers assigned as the emperor's personal protection. Normally, these soldiers were loyal unto death, but Caligula had made the mistake of even mocking and undermining them.
The Praetorian Guard were the people responsible for looking after, for protecting Gaius.
Leading this group, Cassius Correa, and it's believed that for Correa, this was personal.
Chaerea, as part of his service on the Praetorian Guard, was often mocked by Caligula for being effeminate, and when Caligula would hold out his hand for Chaerea to kiss it, he would then pull it back and make an obscene gesture, mocking Chaerea.
Gaius would always give the Praetorian Guard the watchword. So he was always giving Correa watchwords which would be embarrassing for him to transmit to the troops. Correa met Caligula in this corridor. He asked for the watchword, he was given a watchword, at which point he pulls out his sword and he strikes Caligula across the face. Caligula fell down and the fellow conspirators then plunged in their swords. Blood everywhere. And then they fled. The historian Cassius Dio provides us with almost the one funny line. He says that after 3 years, 9 months, and 28 days, Gaius Caligula discovered that he was not a god.
Little Boots, raised on a battlefield, anointed as a god, dies violently in a squalid hallway beneath the imperial palace. But even in death, he appears to have the last laugh.
The aftermath of Caligula's assassination is quite interesting because it kind of reveals the lack of a clear aim on the part of the conspirators. The Praetorian Guard, having killed Caligula, they then go throughout the imperial household finding his relatives and putting them to death as well. But they realise that if they kill off the entire imperial family, their role as the Praetorian Guard, the elite bodyguards of the emperor, becomes obsolete. And actually, it's a much cushier job being stationed in Rome protecting the emperor than it is being out on the front lines in the provinces. And so as they are roaming through the imperial palace, they come across Caligula's uncle Claudius. He thinks he's about to be killed, so he's hiding behind a curtain. And the Praetorian Guard find him, they pull the curtain back, and instead of killing him, they proclaim him emperor.
A reputation as one of the most infamous tyrants in history. A byword for madness, cruelty and excess. Written off by ancient historians as insane, monstrous and perverse, with stories so wild they sound like mythology. But was he in fact just damaged goods, shaped as all are by experiences and traumas early in life, and raised to a position for which he was completely unqualified?
We know that Caligula was exposed to a lot. As a very young boy, he was exposed to extreme violence on the front line. We know that then, as a sexualized teenager, he was exposed to all sorts of vices and depraved sexual activity. His illness meant that his ability to keep these experiences that he's been exposed to throughout his life at bay was eradicated. And that's what we see manifesting in all these acts of madness.
A legacy shaped by fear, betrayal, and failure.
There's a very famous phrase that Caligula was fond of quoting. It's a quotation from the Roman tragic playwright Accius, and the quote is, "Let them hate me so long as they fear me."
This totally encapsulates the psychology of this man, the way he thought. And that's all that matters to him, that they fear me.
They feared him, and they hated him. But in the end, that fear wasn't enough to protect him. How will the sands of time judge his legacy?
There is nothing you can point to which will suggest that this man was anything but a monster, and that seems to have been how he was received, discussed, from within a generation of his life. Is that fair to him?
Does Caligula deserve the title Killer King? He's definitely implicated in a lot of deaths.
He was living in a brutal time. He had seen many of his family murdered. This was the way in which Roman dynastic politics worked. There was no sympathy for the dead. There was no compunction about killing those people who were close to you.
Caligula ascends the imperial throne on a wave of optimism and hope. He dies a hated autocrat who ruled through fear, violence, and personal whim.
He was a terroristic ruler who ruled by hatred, who ruled through fear. He wanted to be known as somebody who killed others with an arbitrary, almost random violence. Without doubt, a killer king.